The wind picked up as Detective Raven Jackson pulled up in front of 237 East Avenue. The gray sky cast a heavy pall over Stockton, and droplets of water dripped down the windshield, blurring the outlines of the police cars already on the sidewalk. The streetlights reflected in the puddles on the sidewalk, creating ghostly glints of yellow light. Raven turned off the engine and looked at the clock. 9:30 p.m. Another call at the end of the shift, another story that ended in blood. She pulled rubber gloves and a notebook out of the glove compartment and checked her phone's charge. Outside the window, the silhouettes of police officers in raincoats flashed. The yellow tape of the cordon fluttered in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, an ambulance siren wailed, though there was no one to help. Raven got out of the car and pulled up the hood of her jacket. Cold drops immediately found their way down her collar, making her shiver. The house looked ordinary, a one-story red brick structure with a small veranda, a neat lawn, and children's bicycles in the yard. White curtains in the windows, a mailbox with the name Crawford neatly inscribed on it, a flower bed with flowers wilted by the autumn frost. Nothing betrayed the horror that had been going on inside an hour ago. It was the kind of house that always turned out to be the site of family tragedies. Quiet, inconspicuous, hiding its secrets behind a facade of respectability. Raven walked up to the cordon where she was met by Sergeant Tommy Wade, a young policeman with a perpetually worried expression on his face. He shifted nervously from foot to foot, occasionally wiping his fogged glasses. In his 3 years with the department, he'd never gotten used to this kind of scene. "What do we got?" she asked, lifting the yellow tape. "Triple homicide. 3 victims, all shot to death. A woman in her 30s, a man in his 40s, and a teenager of 14. The bodies were discovered by a neighbor around 7 p.m. when he came to pick up a mower he'd borrowed. Witnesses? Neighbors heard gunshots around 7:30, but at first thought they were firecrackers. No one saw the killer flee the scene. Weapon? Not found. Shot with a handgun, presumably a .38 caliber, judging by the shell casings." Raven nodded and headed for the house. In her 20 years on the force, she'd seen enough to be surprised by human cruelty, but family tragedies had always struck her as particularly poignant. Perhaps because she herself had raised her 14-year-old daughter Maya without a husband and knew how fragile the family idyll was. Every time she looked at the victims of domestic violence, she thought of her little girl, of how easily things could go wrong. The front door was wide open. Children's sneakers were lying in the hallway, a woman's purple jacket hung on a coat rack, and a man's leather jacket of an expensive brand was next to it. On a shelf by the mirror were the keys to 2 cars and a few small coins. The smell of gunpowder mingled with the aroma of dinner, something Italian, perhaps seafood pasta that had been left uneaten. The smell of lit candles and light notes of expensive men's perfume still lingered in the air. Raven put on her gloves and entered the living room. The room was tastefully furnished, but without frills, a light leather sofa, a glass coffee table, and a large television on the wall. On the shelves were family photos and a few awards, diplomas for graduation from high school, certificates for participation in school competitions. A typical middle-class American family. The first body was lying by the couch, a young black woman in homemade clothes, jeans, and a light sweater. Shot in the chest, apparently at close range. Blood soaked the light-colored carpet beneath her, forming an irregularly shaped dark stain. A look of surprise, almost bewilderment, froze on her face. Death had come so quickly that she hadn't had time to be frightened. Raven crouched beside her, not touching the body. The woman's arms were folded across her chest, no sign that she was trying to defend herself. Either she knew the assassin and didn't expect an attack, or it had all happened too quickly. "This is the lady of the house," CSI Danny Rose, an older man with a graying beard who had worked with Raven for years, said as he approached. "Kira Crawford, 30 years old. On paperwork, lives here with her son Darius." The woman worked 2 jobs, dry cleaner in the morning, waitress at a restaurant in the evening. And the other man? In the kitchen. He's got his ID on him. Xavier Ramsey, 38, owner of a construction company. According to the neighbors, he didn't live here officially, but he was a frequent visitor. Is the 3rd victim in there too? Yeah, a boy. Darius Crawford, 14, attended the local high school. Raven walked through the short hallway into the kitchen. The cozy clutter of family life reigned here. Children's drawings on the refrigerator, school schedules, a shopping list written in feminine handwriting. On the windowsill were small pots of herbs, basil, parsley, rosemary. Someone in this house liked to cook. At the dining table, leaning back in his chair, sat a large man in an expensive shirt and dark pants. Bullet wound to the head. Blood splattered the wall behind him, dark stains appearing on the light-colored wallpaper. There were still plates of uneaten shrimp pasta on the table, 3 glasses of red wine, lit candles and beautiful candlesticks. A family dinner interrupted by gunshots. Raven noticed that one of the glasses was empty, the other 2 nearly full. Someone at the table had drunk more than the others, or the 4th person at the dinner had not yet had time to join the meal. The 3rd body, a teenager of about 14, lay by the refrigerator. Tall for his age, wearing a basketball jersey and jeans. Bullet wound in the back. The boy had tried to run, but he hadn't gotten far. His hand was still reaching for the refrigerator handle, as if he hoped to find shelter there. Raven pressed her lips together. Kids in her line of work were always the toughest challenge. Did they find the weapon? Not yet, Danny answered. It was fired from a revolver, judging by the lack of automatic cartridge case ejection. 38 caliber, 3 shots. Killer knew what he was doing. Every shot was on target. Consistency? Judging by the blood spatter and the postures of the bodies, the man at the table was shot first, then the woman in the living room as she tried to escape. The boy was last. He'd made it to the kitchen, but not in time to hide. Raven walked around the kitchen, studying the surroundings. There was no sign of a struggle, no furniture overturned, dishes in place. There was no robbery either. The man's wallet was on the table with credit cards and cash, expensive appliances in the living room, gold jewelry on the dresser in the bedroom. This was a targeted massacre, not a random crime. On the kitchen counter, she noticed a bouquet of fresh roses in a vase. Someone was preparing for a romantic evening. Next to it lay an unsigned card. To my beloved, forever yours. She went outside, where a small crowd of neighbors had already gathered. The rain had almost stopped, leaving the smell of wet earth and fall leaves in the air. People stood in groups, discussing what had happened in muffled voices, some holding umbrellas or hiding under the canopies of houses. Raven approached an elderly woman who stood closest to the house and clearly knew more than the others. She was wearing a house robe over her clothes and was nervously rubbing her belt. Did you know the family? Of course I did. I'm Dolores Hayes. I've lived across the street for 20 years, the woman said, nodding toward the house with the bright blue door. Kira's a good girl, raised her son alone after her husband went to prison. Hard-working, never complained about anything, though she'd had a hard time. Incarcerated? Yeah, Jalen, about 10 years ago, for robbery, I think. He robbed a bank or a store, I don't remember exactly. Kira's been on her own all this time, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I'd seen her run for the bus at 7 every morning and get home at 10 in the evening. Raven wrote the name down in her notebook. A husband in prison was a clue that could explain a lot. And the man in the kitchen, do you know him? Xavier? He's been here a lot lately, helping Kira with the renovations, taking care of her son. He was a good man. He had a construction company. He had money. Expensive car, nice clothes. He bought sneakers for Darius, took them to the movies. How often did he come over? Dolores looked around, making sure no one could hear her, and lowered her voice. Almost every day for the last 3 years. His car was always parked in the yard, a black pickup truck, expensive. I thought they lived together, but Kira always said they were just friends. When the neighbors asked, She blushed and said he was just helping out around the house. But you didn't believe it? How can you believe it when you see him coming out of the house at 7 in the morning in just his shirt? Dolores shook her head. I don't blame the girl. I understand. She's still young, alone with a child, and her husband is in jail. It's hard for a woman without a man's support, especially with a teenager. Raven nodded. The picture was starting to become clearer. A prisoner's wife who found comfort in the arms of another man. A lover who had effectively replaced the boy's father. And now someone had decided to end it in the most drastic way possible. When was the last time you saw either of them alive? About 6 o'clock today. Xavier came home from work as usual. I saw him go into the house. Then the three of them sat down to dinner at the kitchen table. They lit candles, opened wine. Like a real family, Dolores said, with sadness in her voice. And then what happened? Then I heard gunshots, 3 or 4 bangs. At first I thought it was firecrackers. I didn't know what kids would do. But then it got quiet, suspiciously quiet. Usually they have music playing in the evening, TV on, but here it was dead quiet. How long between the shots and when you went to check it out? 20 minutes maybe. I told my husband first. He said mind your own business. But something was bothering me. So I went in, and the door was wide open. I looked in and saw Kira on the floor. The woman's voice trembled. I ran straight home, called the police. You didn't see anything before the shots were fired? No cars, no strangers? Dolores thought, furrowing her brow. No, it was business as usual, although... She was silent for a moment. About 15 or 20 minutes before the shots were fired, I saw a man walk up to the house. Tall, thin, dark clothes. He walked slow, confident, like he knew where he was going. Did he go into the house? I think so. At least I saw the front door open and the man's silhouette disappear inside. And there was no car around, so he must have walked or parked somewhere far away. Would you be able to identify this man? I don't think so. It was dark and far away. I could only make out the general outline. Tall, thin, slow gait, like someone who was tired or had been walking for a long time. Raven wrote down a few more lines. A stranger approached the house. Shots rang out a quarter of an hour later. 3 people dead. The killer fled on foot. Do you remember Jalen, Kira's husband? Of course I do. He was just like that. Tall, thin, quiet guy, polite, worked in a warehouse somewhere, came home late. Darius looked a lot like him, was like him. Dolores wiped her eyes with the edge of her robe. She questioned a few more neighbors, but got little new information. Everyone knew Kira as a hard-working single mother who never complained about life and was always polite to others. Xavier was described as a generous and kind man who often bought ice cream for local children and helped elderly neighbors with repairs. Little was known about Kira's husband, Jalen, only that he had been in prison for many years for some serious crime. A young mother with a stroller said she had seen Xavier this morning when he was bringing Darius a new backpack for school. An elderly man recalled that Xavier had recently helped him fix a fence and didn't take any money for the work. Everyone spoke warmly of the dead. No one could imagine who would want to hurt them. When the bodies had been taken away and the forensics team had finished their preliminary work, Raven went around the house one more time. In Kira's bedroom, she found family photos, a young couple with an infant in their arms, happy faces, unaware of what awaited them. One of the photos showed a tall, thin man with kind eyes and a wide smile. Jalen Crawford, from the looks of it, back in the days when life still seemed simple and straightforward. In her dresser drawer, she found letters, several dozen envelopes stamped with the seal of the correctional facility. Letters from her husband, which Kira had folded neatly, but, judging by the dust on the envelopes, had not reread for a long time. In the most recent letters, dated last month, Jalen wrote about his imminent release and how much he missed his family. In the boys' room, posters of basketball players and pictures from school events hung on the wall. On the desk were textbooks, unfinished math homework, and a few CDs of music. An ordinary teenage room that was now a monument to a life cut short. One of the pictures showed Darius standing next to Xavier at some sporting event, both smiling at the camera. Replacing a father was no easy task, but Xavier seemed to be handling it. Raven returned to the kitchen and took another look around the scene. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 chairs at the table. A family dinner, but not the family that was supposed to be here according to the paperwork. The prisoner's wife, her de facto husband, and the son who has taken on a new daddy. And somewhere there's a real father who's been waiting 10 years to come home. She noticed a cell phone on the table, an expensive model in a leather case. Xavier's phone, judging by its size. There was a picture on the lock screen, Kira and Darius against the sea, happy and tanned. A family photo of people who weren't officially a family, but lived as a family. Raven walked outside where the rain had picked up again. Police cars began to part ways, yellow ribbons remaining as a reminder of the tragedy. Neighbors were going home, discussing what had happened and speculating about what had happened in house number 237. She got into her car and pulled out her cell phone. It was urgent to check exactly when Jalen Crawford had been released and where he was now. Her intuition, honed by years of work, told her that the tall, thin man who'd approached the house a quarter of an hour before the murder and the released prisoner were the same person. Too many coincidences for mere coincidence. Morning found Raven at the police station with a cup of cold coffee and a stack of papers. Rain was still drizzling outside the window, turning Stockton into a gray, blurry landscape. She'd spent a sleepless night pondering the details of last night's crime, and now she was methodically going over everything she'd managed to gather about the Crawford family. The first thing she did was dial the state correctional facility's front desk. After several minutes on hold, she was answered by the sleepy voice of the duty officer. "I need information on inmate Jalen Crawford," she said, opening a new page of her notebook. "Just a minute, let me check. Crawford, Jalen Marquis, 33 years old. Released yesterday morning at 10:30 by the parole board. Served 10 years of a 15-year sentence for armed bank robbery. Good behavior, participation in educational programs. Address of record? 27 East Avenue, Stockton. Had to report to a parole officer within 48 hours. Did he show up? No, not yet. But the deadline hasn't passed yet." Raven felt her heart quicken. Jalen Crawford had come home yesterday morning after 10 years in prison, and in the evening 3 people had turned up dead in his house. That's a lot of coincidences. "Send me Crawford's personnel file and a photograph," she asked. While the documents were downloaded to her computer, Raven began researching the family's financial situation. What she found made her frown. According to her tax returns, Kira Crawford's income was just over $20,000 a year, the wages of a waitress and a dry cleaner. However, bank statements told a different story. In the account of Kira regularly appeared large sums, $1,500 to $2,000 each month, always in cash. Over the past 3 years, she had received more than $70,000 in this way. There was no official source for this money. Raven opened the family's credit history. The mortgage had been paid off a year and a half ago early, in one $43,000 payment. The car loan for Kira's car closed a year ago. No debt, no late payments. For a single mom working as a waitress, it looked suspicious. She checked the utility bills. The electric bill showed a spike in consumption 3 years ago and consistently high numbers since then. It was as if more people had started living in the house than were officially registered. The phone rang, distracting her from studying the paperwork. "Detective Jackson? It's Dr. Marlowe from the morgue. Preliminary exam results are in. Go ahead." 3 gunshot wounds, all fatal. Xavier Ramsey, shot in the head from about a meter away. Kira Crawford, shot in the chest, bullet through the heart. Darius Crawford, shot in the back, bullet damaged the lung and aorta. Time of death? Between 7:30 and 7 p.m. All 3 shots were fired from the same weapon, a .38 caliber revolver. The order was male, female, then teenager. Any signs of a struggle? None. All the victims were shot suddenly, made no attempt to defend themselves. Nothing suspicious was found under the fingernails of the woman and the boy. Raven wrote down the information and hung up. The picture was becoming clearer and clearer. Someone had entered the house where the family was having a peaceful dinner and shot all 3 of them in cold blood. Professionally, quickly, without emotion. She opened a file with a picture of Jalen Crawford. A thin man with kind eyes looked up from the screen. High forehead, straight nose, neat beard, the same man the neighbor had seen. Age, 33 years, height, 186 centimeters, weight, 70 kilograms. Special features, a scar on his left cheek from a knife wound, a tattoo on his right shoulder with the name Kira. Raven examined the personnel file. Jalen Crawford was born in Oakland, raised by his grandmother after his parents died in a car accident. Graduated from high school, served 2 years in the Army, and worked various jobs. Married Kira Johnson at the age of 22. 1 year later, a son, Darius, was born. No major offenses prior to his arrest. 10 years ago, Jalen robbed a bank branch in downtown Stockton, threatened the teller with a toy gun, demanded $5,000. He was apprehended 2 hours later when he tried to flee on a bus. The motive for the crime was mortgage debt and medical bills after his wife's surgery. In prison, Jalen was a model inmate, got a high school diploma, studied law, participated in rehabilitation programs. No regime violations, no fights or conflicts. He wrote regular letters to his wife and son and sent money from his prison account, small amounts from his work in the prison laundry. Raven scrutinized the correspondence. Jalen's letters were full of love for his family, of plans for the future, of pleas to stay strong and wait for his return. He wrote about how much he missed his son, how he wanted to teach him to play baseball, how he dreamed of finding a good job and starting over. The last letter, sent a month ago, was especially touching. My dear Kira, there is not much left. The commission will review my case next month, and if all goes well, I will be home soon. I've missed you and Darius so much. I fall asleep every night imagining us being a family again. I've changed. I'm a better person. I have plans. I'll get a job, find a new house, go on the vacation we never got to take. I love you both more than life. Replies from Kira came regularly, but they were much shorter and more restrained. She wrote about hardships, about how Darius was growing up, about work and domestic problems. No sign of romantic feelings, no plans for the future, just reports of daily life. Raven noticed an interesting detail. In the last few letters, Kira never once mentioned that she was waiting for her husband to come home. She answered his questions, but avoided the subject of his imminent release. It was as if this event did not make her happy, but rather frightened her. The phone rang again. This time, it was Detective Marcus West from the Economic Crimes Unit. Raven, I checked out Xavier Ramsey like you asked. Interesting personality. Talk to me. Owns a construction firm called Ramsey Construction. Turnover about $2 million a year, 30 employees. Clean record, no tax problems. Bank accounts show steady income and reasonable expenses. Anything suspicious? Regular cash withdrawals. Every month, he withdrew $1,500 to $2,000 from his personal account, always on the same day, the 15th. He's been doing this for the last 3 years. Raven matched the dates. On the 15th, Xavier would withdraw the cash, and on the 16th or 17th, the money would appear in Kira's account. There's something else, Marcus continued. Ramsey wasn't married, but he had health insurance for 2 people, him and one Kira Crawford, as a married couple. Since when? 2.5 years. He's also the beneficiary of a $100,000 life insurance policy on Kira. The picture was becoming clearer and clearer. Xavier Ramsey was effectively supporting his mistress's family, paying their expenses, their health insurance. He had become father to Darius and husband to Kira in everything but official status. Raven decided to visit Kira's place of employment. the Family Hearth restaurant on the main street of the city. It was a small, home-cooked establishment where locals and workers from nearby businesses came to eat. The manager of the restaurant, a full-figured middle-aged woman named Gloria, spoke warmly of Kira. "Lovely girl, very responsible," she said, as she poured Raven a cup of coffee. "Worked for us for 3 years, never late. Customers loved her. Quiet, polite, never complained about life." Did she talk about her family? Sometimes she mentioned her son, proud of him. The boy studied well, played sports. She didn't talk about her husband much. I knew he was in prison, but Kira didn't like to talk about him. Did she talk about Xavier? Gloria hesitated, clearly not wanting to gossip about the deceased. She'd been happier, smiling more, wearing new clothes. I thought she was seeing someone, but she wouldn't say. I saw a man in an expensive car meet her once. Could you describe him? Tall, nice, well-dressed, black, mid-40s, expensive watch, suit. He looked like he had money. Raven thanked Gloria and drove to the dry cleaners where Kira worked in the mornings. There she was, greeted by an elderly Korean woman who owned the place. "Kira is a good worker," she said in broken English. "She came at 7 in the morning and worked until noon. Neat, honest, never stole anything." "She was paid in cash?" "Yeah, just like everybody else. $400 every week. She asked for cash, said she didn't like banks. That explains why Kira's official income was so modest. A significant part of her salary she received in an envelope, which allowed to hide the real standard of living of the family." Back at the department, Raven contacted the school where Darius attended. His class teacher, Mrs. Patricia Lewis, was shocked at the news of her student's death. "Darius was a wonderful boy," she said in a shaky voice. "Smart, well-mannered, never caused trouble, good at school, especially loved math and history." "Did he talk about family?" "He was very fond of his mom, you could tell. He rarely talked about his dad. I knew he was in prison. But in recent years, he often mentioned Uncle Xavier, how he helped with lessons, took him to sports matches, bought things." "Uncle?" "Yeah, he always called him Uncle. I thought he was Mom's brother or something. He was the one who came to parent-teacher conferences, tall man in a suit, very polite. He was interested in Darius's progress, asked how he could help with his studies." "Did your mom come?" "Rarely. I was working double shifts, I didn't have time. But Uncle Xavier was always in the loop about schoolwork." Raven realized that Xavier had completely replaced Darius's father. The boy had gotten used to him, trusted him, perhaps even loved him more than his biological parent, whom he barely remembered. After lunch, she decided to take another look at the Crawford house. The yellow ribbons still hung at the entrance, but it was possible to get inside. Raven methodically searched every room, looking for anything that might shed light on the family drama. In Kira's bedroom, in the drawer of her bedside table, she found a cell phone, an old model that was clearly unused. Raven turned it on and discovered that the last call had been made 6 months ago. There were only a few numbers in the phone's memory, mostly work contacts. Men's clothes hung in the closet, expensive shirts, suits, ties. The sizing matched Xavier's physique. In the bathroom were men's accessories, razor, deodorant, toothbrush. Everything said that the man lived in the house permanently. In the garage, Raven found an interesting detail: 2 sets of car keys on one bunch, one for Kira's car, the other for an expensive pickup truck. Xavier didn't just sleep at the house, he felt like a full-fledged master here. In the workshop in the corner of the garage were children's bicycles, one old and shabby, the other new and expensive. Clearly, Xavier had bought the boy new things, but he had not thrown away the old ones. Perhaps out of sentimentality, or perhaps to avoid drawing the attention of the neighbors to the sudden change in the family standard of living. On the work table in the workshop were some construction project drawings signed by Xavier. He was really using this house as a second office, planning for the future here, thinking long-term. Raven found another curious item, a child's drawing pinned to the bulletin board. It depicted a family of 3, Mom, Uncle Xavier, and the artist himself. All were smiling and holding hands. In the corner of the sheet, a child's hand had written, "My family." As she left the house, her neighbor Dolores approached her. "Detective, can I ask you a question? Have you found the person who did this?" "The investigation is ongoing," Raven replied diplomatically. "I keep thinking about that man who came in yesterday. There was something familiar about him. And then today I remembered. The way he walked. Jalen had the same gait, slow, like he was always tired." "Are you sure?" "No, of course not. It's been 10 years, people change. But there was something similar." Raven got in the car and summarized the day. The picture of the family drama was becoming clearer and clearer. Jalen Crawford had waited 10 years to come home to his beloved wife and son. At home, his wife had been living with another man for 3 years, who had become the boy's father and her de facto husband. Jalen got free, came home, and found that his family was no longer his family. The morning of the second day of the investigation began with an orientation. Raven sent out Jalen Crawford's picture to every police department in the county, bus and train stations, and the airport. The man was armed and extremely dangerous, she warned all her colleagues. The first 24 hours of the search were fruitless. It was as if Jalen had vanished into thin air. He was not seen at the bus station, train station, or airport. Surveillance cameras recorded him leaving the house on East Avenue around 8 p.m. But the trail went cold from there. The man knew the city, knew where to hide. Raven methodically called every motel, hotel, and hostel within a 50-kilometer radius of Stockton. Most of the receptionists answered that they hadn't seen anyone like the description, but some calls went unanswered. By noon on the second day, she had widened her search area. Jalen could have hitchhiked away, could have stolen a car, could be hiding in abandoned buildings. Raven studied a map of the county, noting places where the fugitive might have found temporary shelter. Around 2 hours in the afternoon, Sergeant Wade called. "Raven, we may have a lead. The manager of the Roadrunner Motel on Route 61 called. Says a man matching our suspect checked in last night. Why didn't you call before?" "I was out of town, just got back, and saw our APB faxed over. I'm on my way there. Send a patrol, but keep them at a distance. The man's armed." The Roadrunner Motel was located 30 kilometers out of town, at the intersection of 2 highways. It was a 1-story, Soviet-built building with peeling yellow paint and a neon sign, half of the letters unlit. A place where truckers, traveling families, and people who didn't want to leave a trail stayed. The receptionist, a man in his 50s with a tired face, met Raven in the small office that also served as the front desk. "He's in room 12, he said, lowering his voice. "Checked in last night about 9 o'clock. Paid cash 3 nights in advance. Said his name was John Smith." "What did he look like?" "Tall, thin, black. Looked tired. Clothes wrinkled. No luggage, just a small backpack. Asked for a room off the road. Said he wanted to sleep." "Did he leave the room?" "Saw him this morning, walking to the soda machine. Never showed up again. He didn't have a car, so he walked or hitchhiked." Raven checked the motel grounds. Number 12 was in the far corner of the building, the windows overlooking a vacant lot of tall grass. A good place for someone who didn't want to be in plain sight. The patrol car was already parked in cover behind a gas station 200 meters from the motel. She radioed the officer on duty. "I need an extraction team. Murder suspect, armed, in a motel room. I'm sending coordinates. Team's en route, ETA 20 minutes. Raven decided not to wait. 20 minutes was a long time, in which time Jalen could see activity outside and try to escape. The room didn't have a back exit, but the window overlooked the vacant lot. She could escape through it. She went to the door of room 12 and listened. From inside came the sounds of a television, news or talk shows. Raven knocked softly on the door. "Jalen? Jalen Crawford? This is a police detective. I need to talk to you." The sound of the television faded. A few seconds of silence, then a man's voice. "Are you alone?" Yeah, I just want to talk to you. I'm not going to arrest anyone right now. You got a gun? I do, but I don't reach for it. Jalen, open the door. Let's talk like civilized people. Another minute of silence. Then the lock clicked and the door opened slowly. A tall, thin man with a familiar face stood in the doorway. Jalen Crawford looked older than his 33 years, 10 years in prison having taken its toll. Wrinkles around his eyes, gray in his hair, a tired posture. He was dressed in crumpled jeans and a plaid shirt he'd obviously bought at a thrift store after his release. He wore stubby sneakers on his feet and an old watch he'd worn before his arrest. "Come in," he said, retreating into the back of the room. Raven entered, leaving the door ajar. The room was small and shabby, a double bed, a television, a table, and 2 chairs. On the table was a small backpack and a plastic water bottle. "Sit down." Jalen nodded at the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. "Thank you. I think you know why I'm here." "I do. Because of what happened at the house." "Tell me what happened, Jalen." He was silent for a while, staring at the floor. Then he slowly raised his head and looked at her with tired eyes. 10 years, he said quietly. 10 years I thought about coming home every day. I imagined hugging Kira, talking to my son, being a family again. I read every letter from her 100 times. I carried every picture of Darius with me. "What happened when you got back?" "I was released at 10 BUs in the morning. They gave me $150, a bus ticket to Stockton, and a list of conditions of release. I got into town by lunchtime, walked to the house. I wanted to surprise him." Jalen stood up and walked to the window, not turning to Raven. "I get to the house, and I see an expensive car in the yard. A black pickup truck, shiny, new. I thought maybe Kira had sold my old car and bought a new one. I went to the kitchen window, wanted to peek in." The man's voice trembled. Raven waited, not rushing him. "And there were 3 people sitting at the table, Kira, Darius, and some man. Having dinner, laughing like a family, candles lit, wine on the table. The man's talking about something, Kira's smiling, and Darius. Darius calls him Daddy. What did you feel in that moment?" "Nothing at first. I just stood there staring, not knowing what was going on. I thought maybe it was her brother or a family friend. But then I saw this man put his hand on Kira's shoulder, and she leaned over and kissed him. And that's when I realized." Jalen walked back to the bed and sat down, wrapping his arms around his head. 10 years of deception. 10 years of letters about how she was waiting for me, how she missed me, how hard it was to be alone. And she hadn't been alone for a long time. She hasn't been mine for a long time. "What did you do next?" "I left. I walked around the neighborhood wondering what to do. Went to a bar, had a drink. Then I went back to the house and just sat on the bench across the street, looking out the windows. They were all having dinner, talking, like a real family." "How long did you sit there?" "An hour and a half, maybe. Till dark. Thinking about how it happened, when she found this man, whether Darius knew he had a real father, whether he loved me even a little, or had forgotten me altogether." Raven listened without interrupting. Jalen spoke in a monotone, unemotional, as if he were recounting events that weren't happening to him. And then I remembered the gun. Kira had written in one of her letters that her new friend had helped install the alarm system and left a gun in the house for protection. It's in the kitchen drawer, loaded. "And you decided to go in the house?" "I didn't decide. I just went in, like a dream. I went to the door, knocked. Kira opened it and froze. She didn't expect to see me. I said, 'Hi, honey, I'm home.'" "What happened next?" She freaked out. She started to explain that it wasn't what I thought, that Xavier was just helping the family. But in her eyes, I could see the lie. And fear. She was afraid of me. Jalen was silent for a few moments. A truck drove by outside the window, briefly drowning out the sounds of the rain. I walked into the kitchen. Xavier stood up from the table and extended his hand for a handshake. Said, "You must be Jalen. Heard a lot about you." As if we were old friends, not him sleeping with my wife in my bed. And Darius? Darius sat at the table and looked at me like I was a stranger. There was no joy in his eyes that Daddy was back, only fear and bewilderment. Xavier was his real father. When did you take the gun? When I realized I'd lost everything, that 10 years of my life had been wasted, that my family was gone. Xavier said he and Kira wanted to talk to me, explain everything, find a solution that would work for everyone. A solution. As if I were interfering with their happiness. Jalen stood up and went to the window again. I opened my desk drawer and grabbed my gun. Kira screamed, Darius was frightened, and Xavier didn't even try to run. He stood there looking at me with a kind of sympathy, like a sick man. "And you shot him?" "At him first. 1 shot to the head. He fell back in his chair and never moved again. Then Kira ran into the living room. I followed her. Shot her when she was by the couch." "And Darius?" "He tried to run out of the kitchen, probably trying to get out the back door. I didn't want to kill him, but he saw everything. He could have told the police what I said, what I did, and then, he betrayed me, called a stranger daddy, loved him more than my own father." Jalen's voice grew harsher. Raven realized that killing his son had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. He'd killed his wife and her lover in a fit of rage, but he'd killed the boy in cold blood. "What did you do after the shots were fired?" "I stood in the house for about 5 minutes, looking at them. Thought about how we're finally a family again, all together, forever. Then I took the money out of Xavier's wallet and left. Dumped the gun in the sewer a few blocks away." "How'd you get here?" "Hitchhiked. Drove all night with some truckers. I wanted to get far away, but I realized there was nowhere to go. Every place needs papers, money, connections, and I don't have any of that." Raven pulled out her cell phone and dialed the duty officer's number. "Suspect is in custody. The extraction team can be called off." Jalen turned to her. "I won't resist. I won't deny what I did. I just want people to understand that I'm not a monster. Just a man who was betrayed by the people closest to him." "Jalen Crawford, you're being held on suspicion of the murder of 3 people. You have the right to remain silent." She read him his rights, handcuffed him. Jalen did not resist, did not try to justify himself or beg for mercy. He looked almost relieved. The weight of the secret was finally off him. As they drove into town in the police car, Jalen suddenly spoke. "Detective, can I ask you a question? Do you have any family?" "I do. A daughter. Can you imagine how you'd feel if one day you found out she didn't love you anymore? That she has another mom she loves more?" Raven looked at him in the rearview mirror. There was no anger or madness in the man's eyes, just immense fatigue and devastation. "I don't think I could kill for it," she answered honestly. "I didn't think I could either. Until yesterday, I thought I couldn't either." They drove the rest of the way in silence. They drove in silence the rest of the way, the familiar scenery glimmering out the window. Fields, farms, small towns, ordinary American countryside, where the same ordinary human dramas played out. Love, betrayal, revenge, eternal themes that never change over the centuries. The police department interrogation room smelled of old coffee and sanitizer. Jalen Crawford sat at a metal desk with his hands folded in front of him. The handcuffs had been removed, but a guard stood at the door. Raven turned on the recorder and placed a glass of water in front of the suspect. "Jalen, do you understand what you're being charged with? The murder of 3 people. Kira Crawford, Xavier Ramsey, and Darius Crawford. How do you plead?" "Yes, I killed them." Raven studied the man's face. No sign of remorse or regret, only weariness and a strange relief, as if a weight had finally been lifted from his shoulders. "Tell me again what happened last night, from the beginning." I came home after 10 years in prison. I was hoping to find my wife and son waiting for me. Instead, I found they had a new family. How long were you watching the house? About an hour and a half. Sat on a bench across the street, looked out the windows. Saw them eating dinner, talking, laughing. What did you feel? Bewilderment at first, then anger, then, emptiness. Like 10 years of my life was a lie. Raven wrote the answers into the record. Jalen's every word will be reviewed by the prosecutor, defense attorneys, the judge. What time did you enter the house? About 7:30. Knocked on the door, Kira opened it. What did she say? Nothing at first, just stood there and stared. Then she said, "Jalen, but you weren't supposed to be released until next week." So she knew about my release, but she wasn't expecting me. What's next? I went into the house. In the kitchen, Xavier and Darius were sitting at the table. Xavier stood up, extended his hand for a handshake. He acted like the man of the house. Did he say anything? Said he'd heard a lot about me from Kira. He suggested we sit down, talk quietly. Kira tried to explain that Xavier was just helping the family, that there was nothing between them. Did you believe her? Of course not. Men's clothes in the closet, his toothbrush in the bathroom, family photos of him instead of me. Darius called him Dad. Jalen sipped his water and continued. Xavier said they wanted to talk to me when I was free. Find a solution that would suit everyone. He offered me money for the divorce, $50,000 for me to sign a waiver of parental rights and leave. And what did you say? I didn't say anything. I just opened my desk drawer and took out a gun. The same gun that Kira mentioned in the letter. Why did you shoot Xavier first? Because he stole my family. Not by force, not coercion. He just came and took my place. He became my wife's husband, the father of my son. And Kira? She lied to me for 10 years, writing love letters while she slept with another man. She took my money, my gifts, my plans for the future, all the while building a new life without me. Why was my son killed? Jalen was silent for a few minutes. That was the hardest question of all. He betrayed me, forgotten his own father, and fell in love with a stranger. When I came into the house, there was no joy in his eyes, only fear. He was afraid of me. Darius was a child. He was 4 years old when you were arrested. I know that, but it doesn't change anything. He made his choice. Raven felt disgusted by this logic, but continued her questioning. Her job was to find out the facts, not to judge the perpetrator. What did you do after the murder? Stood in the house for a few minutes, looked at them, thought about how they'd never betray anyone again. Then, took the money out of Xavier's wallet, about $300, dumped the gun in a manhole on the next street over. How'd you get to the motel? Hitchhiked. Caught a car on the highway, drove to the motel, paid for 3 nights, thought the police would be looking for me for days. Were you planning on running? No, I just didn't know what else to do. My whole life fell apart in one day. Raven finished the report and put it in front of Jalen. Read it and sign it if you agree with the facts. Jalen read each line carefully and signed his signature in his sprawling handwriting. No corrections, no objections. Jalen, do you realize that you are facing life imprisonment or the death penalty? I do, and I'm ready for it. Would you like to contact an attorney? Why? I'm not going to deny what I did. I'm not going to ask for leniency from the jury or talk about my troubled childhood. A lawyer can help you avoid the death penalty. And I don't want to avoid it. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Sit in prison and think about how I was betrayed? It's better to end it all at once. Raven turned off the recorder. The formal part was over. The case was solved, the perpetrator had confessed, the evidence had been collected. Now his fate would be decided in court. Could I ask one last question? She asked. Of course. Do you regret what you did? Jalen thought for a moment. For killing Darius, yes. He's my son, no matter what choice he made. But what about Kira and Xavier? No, they got what they deserved. Even death? They killed me long before yesterday, killed my love, my hopes, my plans for the future. I just returned the favor. The guard took Jalen to a cell. Raven stayed in the interrogation room, catching her breath. She'd seen many family tragedies in her 20 years on the job, but this story particularly affected her. Perhaps because there was no clear right and wrong in it. Kira was a young woman who had waited 10 years for her husband from prison. Found love and support in another man, but couldn't tell the truth. Xavier was a good man who loved the woman and her child, replacing the boy's father. Darius grew up without his own daddy and grew attached to the one who was there for him. And Jalen spent 10 years dreaming of a return to his family, planning a future that no longer existed. He learned the truth in the cruelest way possible by seeing it with his own eyes. Who in this story is the victim and who is the executioner? They were all victims of circumstance, lies, and the inability to tell the truth. Raven gathered her papers and headed for the exit. It was still drizzling outside, but the sky was beginning to lighten. The case was closed, but the heaviness in her soul remained. 4 ruined lives, a broken family, a child who would never grow up. She got in her car and pulled out her cell phone to call her daughter. Maya had to be home from school and was probably waiting for her mom at home. Raven wanted to hear her voice, to make sure everything was okay in their little family. "Mom, hi. How's work going?" "I'm fine, honey. I'll be home soon. How's school going?" "It's okay. What's for dinner?" "Whatever you want, we'll make it." An ordinary conversation between mother and daughter on an ordinary day. But after today's events, even such simple words seemed precious. Family was a fragile thing, easy to destroy and hard to rebuild. Raven started the car and drove home. The Crawford case would stay in her mind for a long time, as a reminder that lies and deceit sooner or later destroy the strongest bonds, and that sometimes the truth comes too late.